guys, Alexandra here. So I did notice an increased interest in this article, which honestly just helps you figure out how to write that perfect introduction, because often we have amazing articles, but we don't know how to start them. Most people actually read the introduction. I am one of the few people who would just skip it and go straight to the content of the article. But there are a lot of people who judge an article based on its introduction. Now, the first and one of the most common introduction types is when the author gets the reader to imagine a situation. Like, imagine that you're stranded on an island, or imagine that you've done something, and it doesn't even have to start with the word imagine. You can just have people think about the last time they did something, or just consider the problems they have with the promise that the article is going to help them solve that specific problem. And there's also this specific alternative when you opt for saying something like it's impossible to imagine a world without, which just introduces how common a problem or trend is and how it's really not going to go anywhere anytime soon. Of course, some more detailed introductions, which I love, take this stance that you see here, where they do the imagining in your place. So they describe, sometimes in very great detail, what you're supposed to be imagining. Like in this article from Jackie Buddy, where the first sentence is, "You've bundled up in your chunkiest knits, taken a scenic hayride, and gone on a pick-your-own adventure that culminated in a box of cider donuts and at least 3 homemade pies." Similar to this imagining situation is when people opt to introduce a common problem. Now, for most articles, there is no very huge general persona. Instead, there are very specific segments. Like, you're not going to just target men in general, but you're going to maybe look for marketing professionals in retail or young women who are just looking to get married or something like this. So basically what this introduction does, and it's usually very simple to put together, that's why it's really the most common you will see, is just explaining a common problem. These are the problems that marketers have. These are certain problems that you might experience when getting married or something like this. Most of the time when you do opt for an introduction such as this one here, you are going to make certain assumptions that might or might not be true about the reader. This is why you have to get the reader intent very well and do the SERP analysis beforehand to really understand what kinds of articles and information people are actually looking for. For example, in this article, the first sentence is just simply assuming that the reader doesn't like long-form sales page. Really, everything in the rest of the article is going to be continued from there. And another example here, if you have a successful storefront on eBay or Amazon, you might have thought about expanding to your own standalone WooCommerce store. So this is basically getting in the brain of the reader and kind of trying to understand how they think and just some of the associations they made before, issues they've encountered, or benefits and help they are looking to get. An alternative I often turn to is adding a question and just starting with a question either as the first sentence or just anywhere in that introduction paragraphs. Now, what this does is that it gets people to think, to kind of create their own beliefs before jumping into the article, creating that type of relation with the reader where it's not just your own thoughts going in one direction, but they also can contribute, even if just by thinking about something and then maybe leaving a comment. Now, another reason why people use this is because it's a very easy way for writers to help the reader make the connection between the article and their own problems. Like reading this title, How Switching to the Cloud Can Reduce Cyber Risk, is maybe not going to seem like it's something you need. But then the author comes in and has the reader ask themselves if they are at a cyber risk. And then just people are going to read on to understand what a cyber risk is and how they can prevent it. Really, going for this introduction makes use of people's need to avoid any risk, any bad situation, and just stay as safe as possible in terms of any topic. The way I tend to also use these questions is to just simply ask the question and then promise to deliver a very comprehensive answer throughout the entire article. This is why you might have seen some articles or just small text snippets and sections on blogs where this is what they do. They have their question as the title, and then they come in throughout the article to answer that specific question. And here from the High Five blog, you have an example that's a mix of the imagine and question format. Remember those combat movies of yesteryear where the heroes would gather just before the mission to synchronize their watches? Now next we have the general statement. Honestly, this is a type of introduction that I would most of the time avoid going for. It doesn't bring in any value. It doesn't promise anything. It doesn't make people think about anything. It's just really introducing the topic and maybe helping you add in a keyword for Google's robots to kind of read the content better, but it's not human friendly. Here in this article by Bryson Curl, we have an example of using a general statement to really promise and explain why people should continue to read the article. So in this case, the author explains that emotional intelligence has a top importance in the workplace and that we need to understand this for a bunch of reasons, and you will get the solution to better understanding EI at work in the body of the article. Then we have the self-explanatory introduction, which is the quote. It can be either the first sentence or just something like this, which you just highlight in the first paragraphs. Of course, you can always start it from the very first sentence. You can also add in a quote followed by a question to get you thinking about that quote, or just referencing the quote or mantra roughly in the first sentence without actually having it as the only thing. Now for seasonal articles or just when you have to write news, updates, recent events, it's just simple to mention it in the first sentences so that straight away you can tell readers what the article is about, if there's any theme that you want to follow, if it's related to any event. And similarly, you can make use of maybe past articles you had or even reports. You know, you've seen a lot of those articles that say something like, this report from a certain university found out that, and then the whole article is going to be based off of those findings. My personal favorite is when the author just gets straight to the point and you get the information you need in the very first sentence, whether it's, announcing a new release, like this example from Screaming Frog, or this even more interesting example where they first start by actually talking about their feelings. So you make this type of article a bit more personal. Instead of just saying, we have launched this new email creator, you're going to say, we're so excited, and make use of a lot of formatting options you have to convey that feeling. I always recommend that you add a call to action to your articles, but I've seen some, such as this one from Veronica Bowman, where they actually added the call to action in the introduction, which is really useful if you want to launch something or announce something and you need fast input and feedback from your readers and users. Like if you're launching a community, you're going to want them to write to you or sign up as soon as possible. If you need feedback or are running a report, of course, you're going to need that input before anyone reads an extra 1,000 words. Now, another classic example of an introduction is just giving a definition, like what is a business plan? What is email marketing? And again, the studies, as I said, starting from a study or statistics, any kind of finding either from you or most commonly from a third party. I personally do tend to add in some statistics such as this one, like 22% of something in my introduction, not necessarily as the first sentence, but somewhere there in the introduction to support my statements, because anyone can go out there and say anything. If you don't have proof, nobody's really going to believe you. Then there's the introductions that make it all a bit more personal when you're maybe talking about your experience, talking about anything you went through from getting a new job to using a tool having a bad experience, or anything like this. Sometimes this is how we get the ideas for an article, such as in this case, where the author Tim started from a question that he got from a client, and basically they developed the whole article around that idea. If you're going to take a look at this example from Coach the Life Coach, where the author explains a problem he had, you are straight away being promised that in a way, the author is going to help you overcome a similar problem, and the reader is essentially learning from the author who is experienced and has gone through this same situation before. So here's the real value of basically reading something that was written by a thought leader or just an expert in even the slightest, tiniest situation that you will maybe at some point come across in life. But of course, for brands that have a solid voice, you're not always going to be looking to put your individuals first. So you might want to actually get your brand or business to the front. And here is, a common example you can see. This one is from Evernote, where, they just start with simply saying, at Evernote, we love helping you get organized. Now, this is just something general, but it does present the brand up front. Similarly, you can just start by presenting what you are promoting, not necessarily a product or service, but it can be an event, even your blog, anything. This is like a call to action in many ways. What's really working in tech and software as a service industries a lot these days is just talking about your brand's experience in terms of marketing, tech, like telling people how you managed to get 1,000 sales in one day, or 10,000 views in a month, or anything like this. These are just simply high-value articles in general because they bring in very unique insights. But of course, others opt to, instead of focus on themselves, they do just shift the perspective to the reader. So they use you a lot, they talk about other people's problems, and instead of saying, I did something, I did that, I went through something, I went through an experience, you are going to just use you a lot. Even just, again, making an assumption like, I know what you're thinking, making a presumption that a person knows about something, they've gone through something, and just using a lot of yous, explaining how, in this example, you understand their problems. A technique I also turn to sometimes is just talking about the problems you've experienced or your brand went through, and then switching to your reader to really help them understand how they too can overcome a situation. Or you've also got the general version where you can start by presenting a problem many people, including the reader, are dealing with, and explaining how you have gone through that. So that's, in this case, a shift from you to I. And of course, you can keep the general third-person approach common for interviews and podcasts, success stories, case studies. Now, I do think this approach is boring because you are not getting anyone involved in that. The reader finds it difficult to have any feelings for that specific topic, and you're not really putting yourself forward. So instead, you can opt, like in this example, to present a problem beforehand, add in some statistics, and then introduce your subject matter expert that you're going to interview or just ask for some feedback. Now, storytelling is really big these days, and it's always going to be. People love a good story. If you're going to go on Medium, for example, most of the trending articles are usually like a first-person story that the author is telling about an experience they went through. The introduction really just goes like in this example here. A few weeks ago, I was in the emergency room, and the author just describes the exact situation, just like you would tell a story or write any fiction, actually. And the thing is that many people have just outrageous and unique stories that need to be told, and people are interested in finding and reading out-of-the-box ideas and stories, so you can present those like even from the headline and just making the entire story as exciting to read as possible. Now, another fairly common type of introduction is making a promise. Like, Do you want some motivation, or simply just finding out information on how to start a blog, trying out an exercise to become a better writer, using a question, in this case, want to grow your business through Instagram, to promise that reading this article will help them start their business via this social media platform. Brian Dean's blog posts are usually like this, by simply resuming everything you're going to learn in the introduction. I have done this a couple of times. It's really good if you want people to also understand exactly what they're going to get from reading this and maybe just skip to the section they need. Now, besides the message you want to convey through your article introduction, you can also opt for different approaches to structure. Now, your introduction can be maybe a subtitle. Medium has this option where you can add a subtitle on any article you write, and you can use that either as an introduction or most commonly to resume the article. Then a lot of news outlets have these introduction type of subtitles. You can also opt to have them on your blog post. You can opt for repeating the headline of the article, turning it into a question, or just simply breaking the intro into multiple sentences. This is the approach I go for. You will also see it on lots of top blogs because it makes it easier for people to read the introduction, and you can just skip from one idea to another without having to read everything. And again, this is a very common approach. And this is it about today, guys. If you have any questions about writing article introductions, feel free to let me know in the comments below, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. You can also find the full article in the description below if you want to take a look at each example. Now, as always, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and see you soon in the next video. Have a wonderful day and take care.